isn't that a wonderful sound to a bell? Just look at that. This bell was used for the conductor as he would go through the waiting room here and announce where the train was going, what time it's leaving, and you better get aboard when you hear that bell ringing, or else you might be left behind. That was one thing about the railroad, whether it came to Troy or any place else. If you missed your train, you might have a long stay until the next one.
That's right. So today we're here in my backyard. This is part 2 of a show that we started in Troy. And we didn't even have a chance to touch much on the history of some of the things that we have here at the depot. So where do we start?
Where do we start?
Yeah. There's a case over here.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be better worked in with the
Here, I'll take that.
yeah, with the photos over there. I think.
Right. So there's a lot of photos here.
Yeah, there's a lot of photos.
And whenever anybody comes and visits, they can see the photos. They can see the glass case. Inside the glass case, there are the lights. The red lights and the white lights. And what would they use the white lights for?
I don't recall the white lights. The red and the green, of course, is for a stop and go. And those were done by the station master until they got the electric signs that as on the rails away from the depot, if the train might be stopped on the train somewhere. There's a little bit of a story on that myself. In 1946, my brother Lenny, he just got home from the service after the war, and we were going up to Heartland, Vermont to see my uncle. And we used to all of my brothers and sisters, and myself, of course. We used to go all summer long up to my uncle's farm, and we worked on the farm for all summer until it was time to go back to school. And that meant during the tough times, it meant 6 less mouths for my mother and father to feed, and it meant 6 hired hands that didn't have to be paid. And so it worked out quite well. Well, anyhow, we were going up to the farm, so to speak, to see them. And we got just outside of Keene, and the fog was really terrible. And so we drove along this was like about 1 o'clock in the morning when we left, because he worked in Harrisville, and he had to come back home after his shift was over. And about 1 o'clock we left, and we got up to about East Westmoreland. The fog was so that you could hardly see. But we did progress up. We got up to Walpole, and at the time the Walpole depot was almost right beside where the bridge that goes across the Connecticut, but the road wasn't there. The road came into the town of Walpole, and then down quite a steep slope to get down to the depot. Well, my brother was driving along, and the fog would come and go. And just before we get to the depot, a bank of fog hit right beside the Connecticut River there, and he missed the road and ran over the tracks and blew out 2 tires on the passenger side of the car. And my brother Lenny says, boy, now what are we going to do? I said, I know one thing we're going to do. We're going to get this thing off the tracks, because trains come by here. So we muscled around and finally got it off the track, so if a train did come by, it could get by. And we said, now we'll have to call home and see if we can. We did fortunately have telephone by then, and call home, see if somebody can bring us up a couple of tires. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I said, you get some change in your car? And he said, yeah. So I took the change, and I ran the change between the 2 rails, and it was enough to make the circuit so that the signals would work, and so that there was a train on the tracks. Well, we finally, the next morning, we got our tires and got them on the wheels and get going. Unfortunately, no train had come by then, and so we left. Well, the next day, or the second day, said in the Bellows Falls paper, I think it was, said that someone tried to stop the train by making a circuit across the rails with chains.
You knew who that was.
Yeah, you knew who it was.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was how the signals were made by now, a vehicle by itself would not make a circuit like that because of the rubber tires.
Right.
But you could short it out that way for a short while. But that's where the signals were run, and it was just a simple stop and go. Go for green, and the red was stop. But and those came in probably I think they came into around right after the First World War. And now there's something on the wartime about the railroads all over the country, not just here, but even more so here, because it was it wasn't really a needed road, so to speak. It wasn't one of the heavily traveled ones. But after the First World War, the railroad, which had been taken over by the government, was run almost into the ground, so to speak. It was all worn out.
Right.
And the government didn't pay anything to redo the railroad.
Right.
And then they started, also the government started building concrete highways. Those came into the 1920s. And that was something that they had seen in Europe. Over there, they're riding on concrete highways, and over here we're driving on mud roads. And so they started pouring the concrete highways, and that's why you have the concrete in a lot of the roadways around Keene. And they date back that far, and they really had a good roadbed for them to last this long. Then after the Second World War, about the same thing happened. The government didn't take over the railroads, but they did run them almost to death. And by the time the war was over, every railroad in the country was, really in dire need of repair. Well, Eisenhower, who became president at that time, had been in Germany, and he saw the Autobahn. And he said, wow, he says, look at how they travel here, and we're still traveling in, little crooked roads. And so he started the interstate highway system. And he used the guys that it would be for military use in case of an attack somewhere, that the army would be able to move over. But it was, that was just a good excuse to get it. But that's what started our interstate system. And so that let the trucks and the trucker unions use the interstate system. In the poor railroad, they had to build their own and do their own. Yeah. And so that's why right about that time, right around 1949-50, the railroad started a real demise until a lot of the branches went out. And then of course the automobile came in the early 20s, started nibbling away at the railroad passenger service, and they could get you from door to door, whereas the railroad couldn't, and so you didn't need any timetable to watch. But prior to that, during from the time the railroad was built through here until about 1920, when the automobiles started coming out, there was an awful lot of short traffic passenger service. Like somebody could, you could stop at any of the small towns around here, all over New Hampshire or all over New England even, by just hopping on the train and going that way. But then, as I say, when the automobile came in, that struck a death knell for the railroad. It's really too bad they abandoned them as well as they did. And it's too bad that the state didn't come in, because the state, I believe, on most all of the railroads that went through the state that were abandoned were in due tax money, and the state could have taken them over if they wanted to, just for the paying of the tax funds on them. But we've got things as they are now, but lots of times we wish it was gone by. Yeah. And of course they were coal-fired up until, about 1950, and a locomotive sitting in the main street of Troy here, belching steam and, and belching steam and soot and everything else. And then too, it got to the point where that for the longest while it was necessary, and they really fined the railroads if they didn't whistle when they were supposed to signal stop.
Well, that had to be a safety issue too.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a law that they had to whistle, and they whistled four whistles for each crossing. There would be 2 long, and 1 short, and 1 long, and the last long one would be sounded at the crossing, and so that would keep keep the people aware of where the locomotive was. But then everybody started complaining. Well, not only the soot and whatnot, but we get waking up in the middle of the night with all this noise and whatnot, railroads. And so they did. They stopped them from whistling in a lot of areas. Now they used to be. I was always at the railroad station anyhow, and they used to come in on about the 10:20, and I'd get out. Sometimes I'd get out of the movies, or I'd just walk down there to see the train. And my mother always knew where I was when I'd come home, maybe at 11:15 or something like that. She, never said a word. And but as I got in my bed, I lived up on Elm Street, and as I got in my bed, if I hadn't been at the station when the locomotive left, I could hear the signals from my bedroom. And there would be 36 signals between the Keene Depot station and the Summit Mountain where it goes into the cut up there. And I would always know just exactly where that locomotive was because it would be whistling. And I also got to know the engineers. I was down there many nights to meet the 1020 when it comes in from Boston. And I can't remember the engineers' names, but I knew them. And we'd always have a friendly chat, and I'd always go over and pat one of the huge drivers that they had on there, and like you'd pat a kitten, not knowing if you were going to get a sharp snout from a burst of steam. And but I would when I'd go home, I'd listen to those signals, and I could tell which locomotive. They were all 264 Pacifics, and they varied in the whistle that they had, and I could always tell which numbered locomotive that whistle was. I could tell by the way the engineer pulled the cord as to what engineer was on there,
right.
And then I could also tell. Sometimes I could hear the chugging of the locomotive. The air conditioner was just right. Going up the side of West Mountain out of Keene up towards the summit, I could tell which locomotive it was.
Yeah.
And
you were saying also that you could hear them purr.
It really amused me because I'd stand out there in the cold of the night waiting for the locomotive to come in, and when it came in, I'd be freezing, maybe in 18-degree weather out there, and that locomotive would just sit right there while they're taking on a load of water probably, and or passengers. And that locomotive would just purr right along, just as nice. But sometimes it could be quite quite active. But I always wondered, gee, it sounds so nice in the cold of the night when I'm freezing out here, and that thing is so warm. And a lot of people considered the machine. Of course, the machine is a she, and all considered that she was alive.
Right. Wow, that's what she sounds like.
It was something. And when the first, I forget where I was when the first Cheshire came in 1943, I think it was, and that came in, and I can remember I was outdoors somewhere, and I heard that whistle, which was different, completely different than any other whistle we've had. And I said, "What in the world is that?" So I had to hurry down to the depot and see that. So I was part of the crowd that was down there when it first came through. It came through earlier than that. I think it came in late in the 30s, but it didn't stay here. It was just to go around. Now. And
what did it end up being? A different train,
It was a completely different train. It was a diesel a diesel engine, and it had three sections to it, and the three sections couldn't be detached, so it always went together as three units. And it was called, when it went through here, the Cheshire. Or previous to that, had been named the Yankee Flyer, and it ran over in Boston to Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
And it ran on this route here mainly because the president of the railroad lived in Springfield, and he would take this nice locomotive and almost like bud cars, yep, and he would take it from Boston up to Charlestown, get off at Charlestown, get on the Springfield Electric. He lived in Springfield, Vermont, and he'd be home, and that was his that was his conveyance back and forth to Boston.
Right.
So if you're the president, I guess you can have what you want.
So, Maury, you have a few more artifacts or things that you wanted to show us.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I have this little block here, which is nothing in the world like it. I happened to be living in Florida at the time, and I came back here on vacation just as they were tearing up all of the track and the ties at the depot in Keene on Main Street. And I said, gosh, I said, I got to have that. So, because I said, I've been part of that for so many years, always at the station. So I went over to a pile of ties, and I picked up these date pins that were in the ties that had been discarded, but they came from, this is the main line that runs right past the depot. From south it's going to Boston, north it's going to Bellows Falls. And those are date pins that were actually in the ties at that place, that position.
So would this be 19 or 18?
Yeah.
That's a 30.
No, yeah, that would be 1930, 1928, 1940, 1940, 1940, and this one over here is 1926. And this line here went down to the Ash-Willett branch, which was going to end up in Hinsdale and Northfield. And so I put them in this block just in the same position they were there on the rails.
Yeah.
And what they are, they call them, well, I've always called them date pins, but they also call them date nails and date date spikes. And they put these nails in the tie the year that they put the tie, made the change in the rail. So these particular, this one here is on the main line 28. So from 1928 to 1958, I believe, when these were taken out. 58. No, it was abandoned in 58. All the trains that came into Keene or left Keene went over this 1928 pin.
Wow. Wow.
Now there's about 160,000 locomotives that went over this main line. Not these pins, because these pins aren't old, but during the lifetime of the railroad in Keene, Troy, whatever, about 160,000 trains went past here.
Amazing. And then you have some pins here.
Yeah, I have some.
Let's see.
Now these are rail spikes that came out of the same area, and they're not made when they're made. They're not made really straight, but when they pin them in, it has a tendency to tighten the tie onto the rail onto the tie, so to speak. So this one here looks like it might have been built a little bit, bent a little bit more when they took it out. But these hold the track onto the in this
the ties?
in this manner onto the ties. This one here is and I also got these out of the scrap heap from right in front of the depot. And this one here is relatively new, and and this one here is a little bit older. But these were just driven right into the right into the tie, and the rail sets in like this, and it tightens the rail right down so it can't get off. Then there's another one. This one here is a little bit older. It's also a little bit shorter, a little bit smaller pin. And
And these look like they were pounded. I mean, they don't look like they were poured like
well,
these did.
no, what that is chips of rust.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
the rust has chipped it
I
off.
see.
And this one here was a real find to find this in with all of these other newer ones. This one here probably, I almost say that probably dated back to 1880. And because it's the way, just the way it's formed here, and it's small, it's a little bit shorter, and it had the same function, but it's just a smaller pin, and it was probably, as I say, I think it probably might have been in that tie that it came out of since 1880.
Yeah, yeah. So you might even find some of these today if you're walking around the country.
yeah,
You have to really look.
Yeah. You need to. You know what they find in the mostly in the fills along the rail lines. You know, where areas have been filled in, and some places have been filled in. You know, maybe 40 feet or more. You know, if people have gone in there to excavate it out and see what was in it. You know what they find mostly? Chicken bones.
Really?
Yeah.
Why? Because the trains ran over the chickens?
No, that's when they were laying the track. That's what those guys were eating.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So did these cars have food on them when you were going along, or did you ever bring your own food?
No, there was. I think there was one train a day that had a service such as that. But they did have a guy. I forget what they called him. Gosh, can't think of what they called him. But they had a guy on the train that peddled, a sandwich or something like that, or just little snack things to eat, or maybe a drink or two, and you could buy something like that. It was quite a trip. It would take about 3 hours to get from Boston to Keene, and that was one of the things everybody.
That's not long, really, considering.
No, it isn't.
What it would have taken before.
Yeah, I mean, it was about 10 times faster than what it had taken before, but people don't consider that once they say, well, just.
Now that they've got cars, they can get there.
And right. And the reason for that was because they used to have to stop at every depot along the way, even this one here, and pick up maybe 1 or 2 passengers or whatever it needed. But it was a long trip, and it was the night train that came up. I don't know if it was any faster by riding on the Cheshire where the president rode, but now
It was probably on time. Though.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned that before that the rail line wasn't really coming this way. It was because of so many cuts. It was going over towards Richmond further, but there were a number of grades. And some of the freight cars or gondolas or whatever it might have been got detached from the train itself.
Right.
And
let me just pull this up here.
okay.
Hit you here.
Did that?
Okay. This here shows a lot of the grades.
Yeah, that's a magnificent. I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
And but it is. It gives you the elevation of all where you're going. Can they get a picture of this?
Yeah, we'll lay this in there.
Okay.
So Bellows Falls was really low, and you were telling me that it was easier for the vehicles to go in or out of Bellows Falls. I can't remember.
Coming north.
Okay, so coming north from
Boston.
From Boston.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this one is Ashburnham. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ashburnham, North Ashburnham, Winchington, State Line, Fitzwilliam, Troy, Marlborough, South Keene, and then you get to Keene.
Yeah.
And it was easier for them to come in.
It was easier for them to go north because the rail cars were empty, most of them. And there was one train that came down early in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning. They used to call it the milk train. and it would go not pick up hardly any passengers along the way, because they had to get the milk from Bells Falls, from the Bells Falls Creamery, where they separated it. You know, today you buy skim milk. You know, it's really a healthy thing. You know what they used to do with it? They used to out at the Bells Falls Creamery. There used to be about a 4-inch pipe continuously dumping skim milk into the Connecticut River.
Oh, God. The things that they used to do.
For years and years and years.
Well, Maury, you know what? Another half hour's gone by.
Another half an hour. Should I ring the bell?
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this, and I think we're going to have to do another show, because there's still so much more for us to talk about.
There is.
So, thank you again, and I hope that we do have a chance to talk again soon.
Me too.
Yeah. There's just, I mean, to me, this is what's really important, because if we don't tell this story, then there's going to be a lot of people that don't even recognize any of this, don't have any recollection of it.
They have. I mean, there's tons and tons of people today, and of course the youngsters today have no idea what traveling conditions were. No, everything's quick, easy, fast. So today we've been in my backyard with Maury Whitney, and again, I look forward to talking to you again soon. I'll be there.
All right. So if you're interested in more information about In My Backyard, you can email us at inmybackyardch8@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you. And maybe you have some more information for us about the railroads or history of Keene or different things. This is a show on the Monadnock region. So if you have something that you'd like to share, let us know. So we'll look forward to seeing you again in my backyard.